because we, as digital artists, aren't necessarily respected within the fine arts community, right? Which is more focused on painting and sculpture and those things that you can feel and touch. Whereas pixels on a screen, they just don't have that same value there. And so I looked at that and I said, well, we have among us, there are artists here that should be in galleries, that should, they have been so influential to millions and millions of people out there, but nobody really knows who they are. And why can't we say that this is fine art and that it does have that, that signature or whatever that validates us to the wider art community? So that was the reason why I could see that it was super important to get in there.
Please welcome Adam Swaab. Adam is a creative director and VFX artist who has worked across the entire spectrum of the entertainment industry and beyond. And when he's not doing this, he can be found creating stunning art which leverages his creative visions and knowledge of Houdini. In this episode, enjoy Adam's insights on his creative journey and process, as well as his take on NFTs and why he was an early adopter. Let's go. Okay, let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Learnsquared podcast, and I'm excited to announce our next guest, the brilliant Adam Swaab. Hey Adam.
Hi, how's it going, Aaron?
Very well, thank you for joining me. I'm very excited to speak to you today. Firstly, because I admire your work. Obviously, you're a Learnsquared instructor also on our 2 Houdini courses. But firstly, for anybody who may not be too familiar with yourself, if you'd like to give everyone a quick intro onto who Adam is.
Sure. Well, let's see. I've been in motion graphics, design, animation, visual effects for a long time, probably over 20 years by this point. I've done everything from, Cinema 4D to 3D Studio Max to Houdini, and made a pretty big journey in all those different kinds of softwares and stuff, and mainly using Houdini these days. In terms of my career, I've done films, worked on Tron Legacy, worked on a bunch of, let's call them not great films, things like Twilight series and stuff like that. A lot of things I don't really publicize too much. And was a creative director for a company called Wolf & Crow for a long time, and directed commercials, directed advertising campaigns. And now I kind of just float around doing all kinds of different things. And at the moment, doing a lot of things that aren't commercial projects, but are still using Houdini and still in the tech space, mostly for larger tech clients,
and
who will remain nameless at the
moment. That's quite a list of achievements and things that you've worked on. When did this journey begin for you? Was there like a kind of moment, maybe in childhood or as you were growing up, that kind of led you towards this? Was it like a moment that kind of like sparked everything, thinking I need to do that for a living, or did it something that you kind of found yourself doing?
Oh, well, that's kind of a long story. So I always liked drawing and painting when I was young. I was good at math and science and all that other stuff too, going through school. So I had a choice, really. I could have, I think, gone pretty much anywhere that I wanted or tried all kinds of different things. But I felt like, being able to draw and paint was probably the one thing that was a little bit special, that I could see that a lot of other people just couldn't do naturally. So I said, well, maybe that's something that I should grow, because it's one of the things I can do that, again, a lot of people just can't. So I said, let's go to art school and do that stuff. And I had never actually had any intention of getting into the digital field. I more or less wanted to just do illustrations and paintings. And when I got to school, I did a little bit of film and video, because we actually had access to cameras and stuff like that, which I didn't have growing up. And I fell in love with it and decided I wanted to get into directing and cinematography. So I focused on that at school, moved out to Los Angeles, and had the bad fortune of moving out in the middle of an actor's strike. So there was actually no production going on. And I had just a little bit of backup skills in computers and editing and some of that stuff from my film school days. So ended up as a production assistant at a design company. when I say PA, I mean really like barely touching the computer, running out and getting sandwiches and lunch orders and editing reels and gophering around the city. And then they would throw like menial animation tasks at me, like here, make a cube that like bounces around or
Right.
something really, really menial. Which again, that was a lot for me, and I was thrilled to do it. And eventually, I just kept getting more and more tasks until I was a lead animator there at that company. And from that point, I just decided to grow that. I did do some work and stuff on films in the camera department, and it didn't take too long for me to realize that, thinking down the road that 20, 30 years of carrying camera equipment around probably wasn't a great career choice for me. And being in that nice little boutique design company where you had a nice cushy office and computers and could still be creative, I think was a little more appealing at that point. So that was kind of the start of it. So everything's been pretty much self-taught in terms of that computer skills and doing that stuff there. Again, I graduated from school in the early 2000s, which for those in the audience who remember that, and for those in the audience who have no idea what I'm talking about, there really weren't options for learning things online. Just wasn't there. So you had a couple little like breadcrumbs that you could follow, but mostly you were on your own in terms of teaching yourself stuff.
And what was that journey like? Because I definitely remember those days as well. Again, like no internet tutorials, and just a case of just moving around, figuring out what this thing does and what that thing does, and seeing things connect. Was that something that came natural to you? Like, are you a natural learner? Would you say someone? Because obviously you mentioned that yourself taught. I guess obviously there were struggles in terms of trying to figure out things worked and getting the results you wanted to get. But did the curiosity of figuring out this kind of realm work, did that outweigh the struggles that happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting, of course, to try to teach new things. And it wasn't just that like 3D was new, everything was new, right? This is the dawning of Flash and the dawning of, websites and all of that stuff. And so it was all new. But yeah, it was exciting to learn some of that stuff and really teach yourself your own techniques and your own ways of doing things. Because again, there wasn't like starting with Cinema 4D. How did I get into Cinema 4D? There was a production company that we outsourced some work to, and we knew we had to do some 3D. We wanted some kind of 3D capabilities of our own in that little boutique animation shop. And we're like, well, should we go with Maya? And the person at this other place said, well, why don't you try Cinema 4D? It's just much easier to get into than Maya. And that was it. And
Okay.
there was no like, okay, here's a class you might want to follow or whatever. It was, RTFM. It was read the manual and do your best and keep trying. And then there were, forums where you could look things up, but they were mainly like Creative Cow, which is more of like a technical forum. But these kind of places that actually could teach you foundational learning, it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
Not at all. So I mean, maybe that's why I'm a bit scrappy about how I solve problems still these days. Is I'm just used to dealing with it and trying to figure my
Yeah.
own way out.
That's interesting because I can imagine like a lot of the stuff that you did back then is kind of still, I guess, it's your DNA to how you create and, like you mentioned, solve problems now. Like I guess it's hard to probably answer this in a short sentence, but how have you evolved in terms of your problem solving over those years up until now?
Well, you learn new techniques and you learn more if you're motivated enough. That is. So the problems, from 20 years ago, these are easy problems now. You don't think about them. So the problems grow in scope and complexity. And hopefully, at least for myself, I'm learning more. So I've gotten much heavier into the mathematics side of it because so many of these problems at their core are mathematics problems. I'll give you a really good example of this. Right, Cinema 4D has all the MoGraph features and stuff, and when that came out, that was like crazy. It was amazing. I had no idea how to do that stuff or how you would even go about making those things, those systems. Right, I could use the tools, but I didn't know how to make the tools.
Mhm.
And now, of course, many years later, I do Houdini a lot, and I realized that those tools are actually really easy to make.
Mhm.
There's just very basic bits of math that all get put together to to do that stuff. So that's a really good example of just, evolving in sort of the problem solving stuff. And a lot of it, again, is just accumulation of knowledge
Mm.
and building up some of that foundation.
And did anything ever kind of like put you off in those early days, or even scare you, in terms of like figuring out a pipeline or a workflow, or just certain, I guess, areas of the package? Or were you kind of like fearless and just went head on into anything that you weren't familiar with?
The character stuff has always been a thing where I'm smart enough to know that I don't know that much,
Mm.
right? Like I could do something very basic, but I've also spent time around people who are really very, very good at that stuff. And I know I can never ever be at that level. It would take years. And, that is such a discipline and such a niche, right? That I really hesitate to get into it too much.
Mm.
I don't know if anybody here has ever tried trying to rig a photorealistic face or anything like that, but I spent personally, I spent like a month or 2 months
Wow.
trying to do one, and it just never reached the level where I was like, wow, this doesn't even look good enough to be in a B level video game. It's terrible. So, that's definitely one part where I stay well away from as much as possible.
And I guess like a lot of the stuff, would you say, when it comes to like say commercial work, did a lot of that push your knowledge of, I guess, this new space that you were learning in? Or was it mainly personal projects that you were pushing yourself on as well, or was it a kind of mixture of both?
It was mostly commercial stuff.
Uh,
I mean, honestly, for a long part of my career, I just didn't have the energy to focus on personal work because I was
Interesting. Yeah.
working at these companies and places where you're working 10-hour days
Mhm.
minimum, sometimes working 12 hours or more and going on for weeks at a time. And, mentally, I wasn't in a place to push myself when I got home from work. And, and I also had something to, there's some benefit to saying, well, I'm getting paid to learn stuff. I'm getting paid to push myself there. Let me focus my energies, somewhere else at home,
Mm.
which, sadly was like focusing my energies on eating dinner and watching television. It's a bit different now these days. I've
Yeah.
kind of found a different balance, but definitely earlier on, I mean, I was burning myself out at work just
Wow.
trying to make good stuff because that was the stuff that was visible.
It's,
Yep.
it's interesting that how like burnout is just such a common thing in, I guess, the creative field in general. And just anything where you need to kind of like, where there maybe it's like uncharted territory or just learning something new. Burnout is just always there lurking over your shoulder. But it's good
Yeah.
to good to hear that like you were, whether it was obviously like intentional or just something that your brain was saying, we've had enough of this now, let's just chill out. Like you were still doing that and not forcing it. And obviously you mentioned over time, like responsibilities have changed or you're doing different things now. Um, do you always kind of just listen? Like, do you have? Are you aware now of like what kind of, when you're approaching burnout and how to stop it, or do you kind of just wait for it to happen and then you kind of just find a way to deal with it?
That's a really good question. And I know a lot of people struggle with it. I think part of it is about setting up limits and expectations pretty early so that you don't get to that point. I think that's the main thing is like once you're there, it's too late. You've already jumped over that cliff. So the goal is to make sure that you never get there, that you always can feel fresh and always feel like, like going to work doesn't depress you or sitting in front of your computer doesn't just give you anxiety attacks.
Mm.
And that you have energy for the things in your life that are important. And honestly, a lot of that comes with age. So like is it cool? Can we have like a little discussion about this?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
it might be
Please, yeah,
important.
yeah.
So I'm almost 44, right? I've been doing this for a long time. I've got a family, I got kids, all that other stuff. A kid,
Mm.
not more than one that I know of. And priorities change, right? So when you're young, when you're in your early 20s and you're fresh out of college, like you're fine to work for the pizza and a small paycheck and be at a studio for 14 hours a day because maybe there's not that much else going on in your life, or maybe you want to feel like you're going to grow your career very rapidly or quickly, or you're going to learn a lot. I mean, there are benefits. I'm not going to say that people don't get something out of those relationships, but most of the time they're fairly exploitive, right? If we're being honest about it.
Yeah.
Um, but I can understand why somebody does that, right? And there can be benefits for people. But when you get older, like let's say you have had those awards that you were trying to go for, right? Or you've directed the commercials, or you've reached whatever that creative goal is that you want to do. Do you keep pushing that, or do you step back and say, you know what, that was good. I did it. I did my
Mm.
goal. And you don't have to always keep looking for the next level up. Sometimes you can say, let's go find something else in life that I
Mm.
enjoy. I mean, especially if you do want to keep doing this stuff for a long time, you can't just be singularly focused on this one thing.
Mm.
As anybody will tell you, just being singularly focused on one thing makes for a pretty dull life. So I guess that's the main thing, is like make sure you have other interests and make sure you have time for those other things in your life as well. And I think that's a good way to hopefully balance things out. Because I mean, how much of your life, if you just sit there and add it up, right? And you do count the hours and figure it out in a percentage and subtract sleep from the 24 hours a day that you're alive, right?
Mm.
What percentage of your life do you want to say that you spent sitting in front of a computer?
Yeah.
So that's it. I think it just takes a little bit of reflection on that.
Totally. I totally concur again. Starting a family and dealing with all that kind of stuff versus myself in my 20s and the kind of what I thought was important to either achieve or milestones I wanted to hit versus when you have a family, it's almost like, well, it is a complete different mindset change and everything else and your goals. And, sometimes even work just is a secondary thing, is something that you need to do. And you're more thinking about the family stuff as the ultimate priority. But then, like, excuse me, it is just a case of like trying to figure out that balance. And yeah, 24 hours in your day, each second becomes super important, because when you got like a bunch of things to do and you need to complete them, but time is running out, you definitely appreciate those seconds more and more, and try not to waste them. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. What are the kind of things? So outside of like, say, the work side of things, or even away from the computer, what kind of things interest you and really kind of like, I guess, inspire you?
I mean, honestly, like art is a big part of my life. Like I love looking at art. I love reading things about art. I read a lot of news too.
Mhm.
I'm not like politically involved, but I do like to be informed about what's going on around me.
Mhm.
Obviously, my kid is like my number one priority. Just making sure she has a good life.
Mhm.
So like I would say most of my stuff is actually focused around my daughter.
Mhm.
And with all my free time, it's pretty much her time. I just
Mhm.
feel like I don't have my own
Yeah.
personal time. Um, but yeah, these days it's like most of my job is less about art lately and
Mhm.
more about, yes, I'm sitting in front of a computer and I'm doing things and I'm making content of some kind. But then my free time has been more devoted to actual artistic pursuits and trying to do things that are a bit more meaningful to me. So maybe I'm a bit one dimensional there. I think the other part too is like trying to devote some time to health and well being. So exercising, and unfortunately, still in COVID, and my
Mhm.
gym is open, but with the kid, I haven't been going in just because
Right.
she can't be vaccinated yet, so I don't need to take that risk
Mhm.
personally. That's my choice there. So that's been a bit missing. I will say the last year or two with the
Yeah.
COVID stuff has been not super fun to deal with.
Mm. And like, is that more so just, I guess, well, we're all kind of going through it, and I guess it's similar kind of patterns what everyone's kind of dealing with, and the limitations, and I guess some of the things that we can't do that we used to do. Um, have there been, at least maybe some people have said in a creative sense, it's been a positive because I have more time, ironically, to be back in front of a computer, but more so doing the things that they want to do. Or maybe not so much art related, but in general, they're like kind of focusing on maybe other aspects that perhaps they weren't able to or couldn't focus on, maybe didn't know they wanted to focus on during this time. Has
Yeah.
anything like that happened for yourself?
Yeah, it's really interesting that coincided with COVID. It coincided with some dissatisfaction I had at um, my current place or former place of employment.
Mhm.
There was all these things kind of actually came about at the exact same time where I really did want to do things more for myself. And the opportunity presented itself by basically being locked in my house for a long time in long stretches. And also the kind of growing, I don't know if we want to touch on this at all, but like the growing, NFT crypto art scene as well. All of these things kind of coincided with like there is a pathway forward for potentially doing your own work and
Mhm.
exploring your own thing outside of a client space. So yeah, that's been a big part of the last 2 years or so.
I'd love to talk about NFTs. In fact, that's a great segue to NFTs. So yeah, obviously, one of my roles at Learnsquared is just taking care of the marketing side of things, and social media is one of those. And obviously, just keep an eye on what our instructors are doing, and obviously our friends and family of Learnsquared what are doing. And yeah, around that time, or even just I guess before that, always seen the kind of cool things that you make. And it was because before I worked for Learnsquared, I was just a quote unquote student, just someone just trying to learn and find their way. And it was your Houdini stuff, obviously the course that came out, that
Mm,
really opened my eyes, thinking that wow, this is super cool. Look at this super cool package that can do all these, ironic, perfect name that you called it because it looks like magical things. I tend to do concept art, mainly vehicles, so almost completely opposite to what you tend to see motion graphic side of things tend to be. But yet there was something really appealing about that, and obviously the way you used it and the kind of stuff that you were making was just triggering off those creative synapses and thinking, wow, look at the possibilities. And then
mm,
seeing the things that you were creating, then obviously the NFT space and the animations and the creations and the little pieces that you're making for that. Um, when you got involved with NFTs and a bit like myself early on, and I thought I figured it out, but now I'm even more confused than ever with how quickly it's kind of expanded. Um, what was it like for yourself? Were you something that was thinking, what is this kind of thing, or did you kind of have a grasp on that particular space and I guess the crypto sphere in general?
Well, I still don't understand a lot of what happens in crypto. When I say that, I mean like all the chains and the finance
Mm.
side of it, like almost zero interest actually in that stuff.
Mhm.
But I jumped into the NFT stuff really early, actually. Even before Beeple did his stuff, I was already in
Yeah,
and
yeah, so yeah.
releasing things. So I understood it right away. Like I don't want to like really pat myself on the back too much, but like as soon as I started to research what it was all about, and before it was mainstreamed and any of that stuff, I was like, "Holy moly,
Mm.
this is big. This is really big. Get in now."
Mhm.
So I think that's part of the reason why I was able to get into some of those places, like Maker's Place and
Mhm.
Super Rare, because I was so early trying to get in, and I mean, the writing was on the wall. It was just plain to see in terms of how big it could potentially be. And we've seen it blow up this year. It's going to get even bigger over the next couple of years. And it's
Mhm.
going to, I think, eat the internet. It's going to, I mean, Web 3.0 is basically here
Mhm.
and it's being built around us right now. And NFTs currently are at the heart of it. But, they'll be not quite the heart of it in another year or so. Things will push out. There's going to be new things coming in.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, like let me at least talk about what was appealing from the beginning, which a lot of people say people jumped into it just because there's money there.
Mhm.
There is money there, but there wasn't when I started. My things weren't selling for that much. Ethereum was only $300, you know,
Mhm.
value at that point per ETH. So it was definitely a different time than it is right now. Um, the thing that excited me was the idea that you could put a digital signature on your work.
Mhm.
And you could actually say that this video file, this one, not the thousand that are out there, but this
Mhm.
one is the one that has my stamp on it, the one that I say is the official version of record.
Mhm.
And the reason that that's important is because that allows ownership, yes, but it also allows some legitimacy and archival purpose for the purposes of actual fine art
Mhm.
curation. Because we, as digital artists, aren't necessarily respected within the fine arts community,
Mm.
right? Which is more focused on painting and sculpture and those things that you can feel and touch. Whereas pixels on a screen, they just don't have that same value there.
Mm.
And so I looked at that and I said, well, we have among us, there are artists here that should be in galleries that should, they have been so influential to millions and millions of people out there, but nobody really knows who they are. And
Mm.
why can't we say that this is fine art and that it does have that, that signature or whatever that validates us to the wider art community?
Mm.
So that was the reason why I could see that it was super important to get in there. And then I could sense obviously that there was a market and a community building around it that would value the work too. Now, obviously it's still a lot of crypto speculators and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, that will change a bit, I think, but we'll see. Um, but like even if the money is not there, I still think it's important if you can to and if you care about your work and you care about preserving it to try to put those little signatures on it if possible. And there are ways to do it without being horrible to the environment and all that other
Mm.
stuff, because that's a big hot button issue
Yeah.
as well is the environmental impact of all of this stuff, which, I have concerns over as well.
Mm. Yeah, no, I guess it almost like the same how I mean it has been bubbling I guess for a number of years, but how quickly it came onto the scene in terms of the I guess everyone's attention span, and then all of the issues that came about it and the criticisms and the drawbacks and the pros and the cons all kind of exploded at once, and then everyone's trying to deal with that at the same time, and it was kind of like in time people will look back at that point and think, like analyze it and do documentaries on it and all that kind of stuff. But I totally agree with you in terms of like how important it is or the value that it can have as artists and how they can use it to, like another space or a realm that their art can exist in. And obviously, like you mentioned, adding value to pixels or, like in the digital art sphere, like giving that, you could say, credibility to maybe people outside that sphere. There's definitely a lot of things that are positive for that. Where do you see this heading? Like, are there any predictions that you have or any hunches that you have that, like in a positive way at least, where you think, at least for digital artists, where this can potentially end up, or the possibilities where things can actually even get better in this space?
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky balance. This is what I'm seeing right now is that a lot of digital artists are going to be co-opted into producing NFTs for large brands, and they will have their names erased from what's going on.
Right.
So that's the danger, right? Is we've carved out a space for ourselves and we're able to get some recognition from ourselves, but we have limited resources,
Mm.
right? We're individuals. But now some brands, and I'm going to use a name, but I don't, it's just an example and it doesn't mean that they have anything to do with anything. So, please nobody sue me over this stuff. Right. But let's say theoretically, right? Let's say that Nike, right, jumps in. So who is actually making the work that Nike's going to be putting out there and selling as NFTs? It's artists like us. It's people that work for the company. That's how it's going to work, is that they're going to co-opt what we're already doing and what we're already building. And I'm not going to say the word exploit. That's not the right word, but because people will be compensated for their time. But, are their names going to be on it? Will they be credited? Who's going to know who actually did the work? And that's the bigger issue, right? It's like seeing the large companies take over the space. I think it's inevitable. And I think it's a question of whether artists are able to maintain their individuality, stand up for their rights, be cut in on the profits. Like the way that this blockchain stuff works, like if a company like Nike did release an NFT, there's every reason that an artist who actually made the work should have their name recorded in the blockchain and perpetually receive royalties for what they're doing. Because that can be baked in the contract. It's baked into the art contracts too. So anyway, you'll see the big companies coming in. Video games are going to be huge, huge in the NFT space.
Hmm.
Fashion will be huge in the NFT space. I mean, we're talking about, right? You have your digital avatars for metaverse stuff, and you could easily do a body scan of yourself, put yourself in a digital, I don't know. Again, we'll use Nike as an example. In a Nike store, try on the Nike clothes on your avatar. You like it? Hit a one button purchase. Now you have the NFT of the clothes, but you also get the physical clothes sent to yourself that match you, right? There's so many possibilities
Hmm.
out there. And then those clothes that you're wearing in that metaverse will also show up on your video game character in Call of Duty or some other thing that's there, right? So there's this whole connectivity thing, and you're going to see so many people, so many big companies tapping into that. I think
Hmm.
it's a pretty interesting world.
I guess it's kind of similar to what happened with YouTube and those kind of areas, right? Like initially it was just creators, people adopting it, and then when it became what it is now, and people making obviously like gaining huge audiences from it, and then it is, at least in a lot of spaces, becoming or has become very commercial with brands jumping on and like doing partnerships and so on and so forth and all that kind of stuff. I guess it's, yeah, it's what you just mentioned. It's almost logical and inevitable that that will happen. When there's so much, I guess, like when people's attention, like Sauron's eye, like, goes to another place, and doesn't really shift from there, then the whoever has, like you mentioned, the resources to kind of exploit that or take advantage of that and profit from that will, I guess, eventually, or find a way to use it to their advantage, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, companies exist to make money for their shareholders. That's and they'll do it whatever way they can. That's kind of their mission. As artists, we have a different mission. Our
Mm.
mission, hopefully, is to support ourselves and our family. Um, but our true mission, hopefully as well, is to put amazing things out into the
Mm.
world, beautiful things or thought provoking, challenging things. So we have different mission statements versus a large company, and again, there's going to be a little bit of a battle there.
Yeah, for sure. And regarding your work for, I guess, the NFT space and just your projects from there, are you making like, has your, I guess, creative mindset switched a little bit to what you create, or are you making things that you've always wanted to create, but then packaged in a way that's suitable for this space? Like, are you kind of like, are you just free flowing and make something and then putting it on there, or is it more strategic and thought out before you, I guess, make it and then release it?
For the most part, I don't create specifically for the space.
Uh-huh.
I create things that I think are interesting and are authentic for
Mm.
what I want to do. I do have one project that's going to be a kind of larger generative project, and that one is made for the space.
Mhm.
I would have, if it was just for me, I might have made like 3 or 4 of these things and left it at that. But I understand that there's a wider collector base that wants
Mm.
to own things, and they want to own things at an affordable price. So, I have something coming out which is going to be like 88 series, 88 pieces in the series,
Wow.
which is way more than what I would really want to do for
Yeah.
myself. But I understand the need for it, and it kind of would be cool to have a little collection like that. Um, but that's about it. The rest is really just doing the things that I want to do, and I think we've passed the point of assuming that because you make something, it will sell.
Mm.
We had a couple hot months in last year, and that has died down so significantly that
Mm.
I really would tell people just make what's in your heart
Mm.
and stop trying to make something that you think is going to sell because it's the market's cool right now.
Yeah, I guess it's similar kind of, like social media even and art station platforms like that. Like you can kind of see when people are just putting, like you mentioned, their heart and soul into their projects and putting it up there, and it's either like passion projects or even commercial stuff they're just putting on there versus um art that's been put up there just for the sake of being put up on there. It's quite big on, quite more, you could say, common on social media because of like getting attention, likes, and clicks and stuff. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think people have been conditioned pretty poorly over the last 10 years to like try to do dailies and not take their time with what they're
Yeah.
doing and think that they have to constantly be putting something new out every day. And I think it requires a bit more discipline just
Mm-hmm.
in general. Like, yes, you can make something every day. Is it going to be great? I don't know. It's probably better if you spend some more time on it,
Yeah.
and probably better if you don't try to sell and mint everything you make,
Yes.
try to weed out I don't know. There's no reason. I guess I'd say like make sure there's a reason to put stuff out,
Yeah.
and hopefully the reason isn't to get likes and attention.
I mean, I guess like, were you the same with prior to NFT space? Were you the same with your social media feeds as well? Did you only put out
Yeah.
stuff that you want to put out? Or did you kind of, whatever you're working on, work in progresses, or maybe even just thinking, yeah, this will be good for IG, whatever? Did you do that, or were you kind of just like still the same, thinking I'm only going to put out X, Y, and Z because this is important to put out?
No, there wasn't really a plan, but I can say I never
Uh,
did dailies.
yeah.
Not that I have anything against dailies. That's just that wasn't in my discipline.
Mm,
And I try not to put out work, not too many works in progress, just
mm-hmm,
because my process is so messy that
mm,
I mean, if you see a work in progress, you're just gonna say, "What is this garbage?" Um, so it usually doesn't make any sense to put something out that just looks terrible. So
yeah,
I
fair
just
enough.
typically wait.
Now, from my personal point of view, like I'm someone who has been thinking about getting an NFT space, and I definitely tried to jump on the bandwagon earlier on in the year, but then
Mm.
I just didn't do it. I'm kind of glad I didn't. Just waited out a little bit. Um, what would you advise somebody who is trying to get on? Like, where's the best place to go, or maybe not even just the best place to go and mint stuff? Like, kind of things to keep an eye out for, or just even words of advice from your own experiences.
Hmm. That's very interesting. It's a very interesting question. So one problem is that there's lots of gatekeeping, right, going on, which like if you might be a great artist and you might say, I want to get on super rare. And I know really, really good artists who can't get on there because
Mm,
they're just not processing applications right now. So even if I say like super rare is the place that, you know, let's say I don't even want to give it any sort of special attention because there's so many other places out there that have great art, right? It's
mm,
just one place. But like let's say that you had your heart set on that place. I can't say that you'll get in because
mhm,
they seem to just not be processing applications or going very slowly or using some sort of metric that I couldn't tell you
mm,
why or how. And you have the same thing with, Maker's Place. You have the same thing with a couple of these other gated places.
mm.
So, OpenSea seems viable. However, you're basically out there on your own and you're in charge of your own promotion and trying to get people interested in what you're doing. And you're going to get lost in a sea of millions of other things that are out there.
Mm.
So I think if you can find a community, that's probably the best thing because getting community support, getting people interested in your work, if you want to sell it, right? You can't shout out into the void and hope that
Yeah.
somebody's going to hear you and like what you're doing. It doesn't work. You have to get eyeballs on your stuff,
Mm.
and being part of a community seems to really help. And that's one thing, like the big project that I'm doing, the 88 piece thing. I'm doing that with a totally brand new uh, platform called Nil,
Mm.
which I had no idea what I was doing when I even went there. I was part of a totally different community, a community just called N, which was just about numbers, right? It
Mhm.
sounds very abstract, but they basically minted 8,888 numbers and like, it's just numbers, man. Do whatever you want to do with them. And so I joined the community trying to understand how are people using these numbers? How are they doing things like that? And then
Mhm.
what kind of projects are happening? And then that kind of morphed into, oh, hey, we're starting a marketplace for some of our stuff. And I think that at least my work probably will sell out, hopefully, to the members of that community at least.
Mm.
But I do know that I have the backing of the community. I have the excitement of the community. And if I try to do that on OpenSea and I was just like, here's 88 pieces, like they're just going to sit there.
Yeah.
Um, so community, I think, is a huge, huge portion of this thing, and being authentic in the community too,
Mm.
not just like jumping in and being like, buy Cheeseheads number 27 because it's gonna moon. Like, don't do that dumb stuff.
Yeah.
Just be authentic in there.
And what kind of like expectations from your experience would you say that people should set themselves? Because obviously you've seen astronomical amounts of um, money being like exchanged just on these platforms. I know you mentioned obviously that was more a case of earlier on in the year when there was a big
Hmm.
interest in all this kind of stuff. But even still, like for somebody who perhaps is still trying to get their first job in the industry, some people are still selling a piece that is nowhere near, like Beeple kind of money, but nevertheless is still more than a yearly salary.
Yeah.
Like my personal opinion is a case of like still, like don't pay attention or don't get hung up on that too much. But obviously, it's inevitable that people may still think that way when you see those numbers and you see them actually happening as opposed to just something word of mouth thinking, hey, you can earn this much. Like people are clearly earning X, Y, and Z. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I say set zero expectations.
Mm,
Um, when you say people are earning XYZ, look at how many artists are in the space and then figure out what percentage of artists are actually earning those kind of big dollars.
mm,
And it's very small. It's like, less than 4% or something like that.
mm,
It's teeny. It's really small. So to think that you're going to jump in and be in that top 4%, you know, it's not likely.
mm,
And I'm not saying this from a point of talent or skill or any of that stuff. I'm just saying it based on mathematics. It's
mm,
not likely. Um, like even myself, right? I'll give you a great example. Like I've done okay. I'm not in that top percent, and I'm not
mm,
even in the realm of like being able to quit a day job.
mm,
I haven't made that enough money to cover my
mm,
yearly costs. So it's not the type of thing where I'd say, that you can easily do it. There was a moment, again, a moment, and if you had the right stuff at the right moment, you could have done all right. Things have changed a bit here.
mm.
So zero expectation.
Very logical and obviously makes sense. And I guess it's also more, I guess, a short term thinking about the money side of things, and just like you mentioned earlier about focus on making something genuine, make something authentic, and build. It's like a portfolio. You don't build a portfolio in a week unless you're super, super, super talented. You got to learn, you got to build that and curate that and all that kind of stuff. And then
Yeah, and the other thing,
sorry, yeah,
just on that point, like, to make work, this is just a general artistic thing. Make work that's authentic to you. Don't make something because you think it should sell or because you
yes,
see that there's a vocabulary out there that people want to buy. When I say vocabulary, I mean like throwing in Ethereum symbols and,
yeah,
Bitcoins and Guy Fawkes masks and all this other stuff. Like,
yeah.
if it's authentic to you, great. If there's a reason for you to do it, great. If you're doing it because you're seeing, oh, people are buying that stuff, like, that's a different story.
And I guess like your enjoyment in creating that is obviously going to just be evaporated, right? Like it's doing something that you think is for somebody else when in fact you should be. It's like working for a client then in that case. It's almost a case of working for yourself is, I guess, the funniest thing, especially when you're in complete control of the direction of it, how it's going to turn out, and make sure that your intention behind the piece is completely there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, satisfy yourself first,
Hmm.
I think. I can't tell you, really, I can't tell you what makes somebody push the buy button.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
I don't know. I don't know. Everybody has their own
Mm.
things. I've talked to people that have bought my work and I'm like, why did you buy that? And they said, oh, I like the colors. I'm like, oh, that was it. Like people come from their own places. So
Mm.
don't worry about it. Just make the things that are authentic to you.
And speaking of satisfaction, one thing that I find satisfying, obviously, of course, is your work. And
Oh, thank you.
um, again, just not just only the finished piece, but the way you create as well. And um, obviously, just plug in your Learnsquared courses here, just how you teach that and your theories behind it and how thorough you are.
Oh,
That's
thank you.
enjoyable to see as well, because it just shows that something like Houdini, for example, which for me, even still now, but it's like the way I describe it when I first started using it, and it's been a few years now, and I'm still nowhere near fluent in it.
Mm.
Is like going to a foreign country, not knowing the language, not knowing to communicate, but you're just admiring the view and seeing all these cool things around you, and
Oh, yeah.
you just wanna kind of like, okay, I need to understand the lingo, understand the language, understand the custom, so I can fully immerse myself in this space.
Yep.
How was I would like to just before we wrap up the podcast, I'd love to know a bit
Yeah.
more about your Houdini journey, and how you get to exploit it in the way to make all these fantastic creations that you do.
Well, again, little by little, it took
Mhm.
probably 2 years of using it daily until I felt comfortable with it.
Mhm.
And when I say comfortable, I mean like, yeah, I can make things. Um, but am I a master of fluids at 2 years? No. Am
Mm.
I a master of smoke and fire? No. Am I a master of particles? No. Like none of that stuff. It's such a huge, dense package. There's so many things in it that it's really hard to feel like you're going to master everything, right?
Mhm.
You can't. It takes a really long time, and it's constantly evolving and changing. So just when you know, I know how to do fluids. Oh well, really? Here's flip fluids now. It's a new thing. And you're like, oh no, got to learn this new thing. And then oh, I know how to do cloth. Oh no, no, no. Here's vellum.
Mhm.
Learn it over. So you're constantly learning and evolving, and things are changing. And the good news is it's all getting easier for the most part,
Mm.
right? At least from my perspective. But I'm also hearing that too from people getting involved, and Side Effects is making some great strides into making things easier. Um, but in terms of like that journey, it's like little by little, and figure out what things interest you,
Mhm.
and go after that part of the thing that interests you the most, because that's going to be the most satisfying. Is not trying to take the entire thing at once, but like, oh, I like particles. Cool. Let's spend a month learning them. Let's spend
Mm.
a month just doing everything I can with particles, and then having fun and doing experiments and seeing where I can push it. And then after that, you're like, oh, I really curious about fire. I don't know. I saw somebody do some really good fire one day, and I just want to know if I can do it. Well, cool. Spend a month doing it. Spend 2 months doing it. Spend three. Um, and you will learn. You'll grow. But and that's kind of the attitude that I had, and I still have
Mm.
in like projects that I do. I might see like some crazy rigid body simulation and get inspired by that, and say, I know a bit about rigid bodies. I kind of know how to put constraints together, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to make it, you know, work like that, or have this level of control, or have this
Mhm.
level of detail and granularity, and, all the extras that are part of it, and why not go on a journey, and why not do that? And I think that's been my attitude the whole way through, is to find one little narrow thing that interests me, and just learn as much as I can in, a concentrated amount of time.
Mm.
I think that's probably a good methodology for everybody. And I think with the Learnsquared classes, that's kind of what I tried to do as well, is put a logical foundation there, in terms of, okay, you're going to do this. Now you're going to do this. Now you're going to do
Yeah.
this. Okay. You like particles? Great. We're going to do a class just on that, and give you a really good foundation for how to work with that.
And what so like obviously one thing about Houdini is it just seems there's no, literally the sky's the limit. You can do anything in there. How do you, is that a software that you exclusively use pretty much, or do you kind of blend it with other different packages?
The only other package I use for 3D content is Blender for sculpting,
Mm.
and that's it. There's no other reason for me to go into another package.
Mm.
I don't even own them. I own Houdini, Blender's free,
Yeah.
and then I composite in Fusion, and I also have the Substance um, suite.
Yeah.
So, do my texturing and Painter and Designer and stuff like that.
Wow. And how long have you been using Houdini now?
So I guess it's been a long time. I don't keep track of the
Yeah.
years.
Or like rather, what was the
But
thing that
it's
really drew you
maybe,
to it? Because obviously you were working like Maya and C4D or 3ds Max, sorry, prior to that.
yeah, it's three. I
What?
was at Blur
Yeah.
and working using 3D Studio Max
Yeah.
almost daily, and then Cinema 4D for a bunch of stuff there too. And one of the effects artists there, we had a job that was it was difficult. We couldn't. I couldn't do it in with my knowledge, and I
Mm.
certainly couldn't do it in Cinema 4D. And so we had an effects artist there. He said, "Ah, give it to me, and I'll get it done in Houdini." And
Hmm.
we're like, "Well, we don't have licenses for that." He's like, "I got my own license. Don't worry about it." And he came back like, and it was done, and it was amazing. I'm like, well, what is this thing? He's like, check it out. It just came out for the Mac, so you can finally use it on your home computer that you have. And so he got me really interested in it, just because I could see he could do something easily that I couldn't do in my other programs.
Hmm.
And he was really talking it up quite a bit. So it was available for the Mac, which was amazing, because a lot of stuff wasn't. And that was the first release that they did that had an apprentice version too, where you could actually just learn it for free. So I dug in, and I mean, right away, like Cinema 4D, I would try to throw 10,000 particles at it and it would chug, chug, chug. And then I tried the same thing with Houdini and was like, oh, you want to give me 2 million particles? Yeah, come on, let's go. And I was like, oh my God. It was just an eye-opening moment. So I think I never went back after that.
Yeah, it's like, I'm definitely not nowhere near the same level as yourself, but it's even the things where I definitely hit like a ceiling and don't know what I'm doing. There's just something alluring about it that you just think, because again, like you mentioned, the possibilities, you just think once I get past a certain hurdle, it's just super, super awesome chaos after that point. One thing I personally do struggle with, and I'd love to get your opinion on this,
Sure.
is and you mentioned it earlier, it's a case of like you figure something out and then it gets updated and it's completely changed, or that workflow is almost obsolete now.
Yeah.
What kind of things would you say is useful to, like, core things that you should say, okay, keep an eye on these, make sure you keep on top of this, and then everything else will still fall in place even if they do change things?
Well, the SOP context is the one thing that's that's constant. It's going to be there no matter what. Um, you just as an artist, no matter what you're doing, whether you're in effects or modeling or procedural level building, no matter what part of the pipeline and industry you're in, you're going to be doing 90% of your work in SOPs. So getting a good understanding of the tools that are there and working in that context is the most important thing. And even understanding how to do some things without going to simulation, right? There's plenty of methodologies and ways that you can move points around procedurally and animate things without needing to go into simulation. So SOPs is the number one thing. Absolutely. The number two thing that I would really, it's new, but I think it's not going to go away. And I think you'd be best to invest some time in it, even though it's really hard and it is a bit mystifying, is USD. In Houdini, Solaris is their USD, or LOPS is their USD context. And it's basically a USD stage. That's a bit tricky, but from what I'm seeing about the future and about how things are kind of building and working together, USD seems like that thing that it would be really good to invest time learning and understanding, even though there still are not a lot of render engines and Hydra delegates that are quite all the way functional yet for Houdini. I think it's just a matter of time.
Sweet. And just one final question from myself before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts or words from yourself, things we can look forward to from yourself in the future?
No, I mean, I don't operate with a plan for the most part. I have a couple projects on the horizon, but I just chase whatever interests me usually at the moment. And sometimes that means being flexible and not having a plan. I'm driven, but I'm chill.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect blend.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I hope that wasn't a horrible answer. It's
a beautiful answer.
It's the answer I've got, though.
No, that's perfect. Adam, thank you very much. Always a fan of your work, and thank you for lending me your time and dropping your wisdom. And yeah, I'll definitely be following those tips you gave.
Thanks, Aaron. This was a great chat. It was a pleasure to do that with you.
A huge thanks to Adam for joining me. Hit the links below to see what Adam's been up to and give him a follow. Check out his Learnsquared courses, which can be found in the Houdini bundle, and learn one of the most powerful creative tools available right now. I've been your host, Aaron Dander. Till next time.